You are listening to TBR Radio Presents The Dixie Heritage Show, with your host, the director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed Tbr'S.
Starting in 2015, I began a series of videos on YouTube that I titled Southern Baptists for Southern Heritage. And I would like to refer you to them. You just go to YouTube and the little search engine there at the top of YouTube. You just type in Southern Baptists for Southern Heritage. One of them was the life of General Julius Howell, who was a Southern Baptist leader. Prior to his leadership role in the Southern Baptist Convention, he was a general in the Confederate Army. Another one of those videos was on the life of Lottie Moon. Of course, we all know Lottie Moon as the object or subject or namesake of the Christmas offering for foreign missions that Southern Baptists take up every year at Christmas time. But what we don't generally know or think about is that Lottie Moon, before she became a missionary, was a spy. She was an agent of espionage for the Confederate government during the war between the states. And so it was on the Confederate spy alter ego life, if you will, of Lottie Moon, and that was a very popular video. I think it may have gotten more hits than any other. There was a video up there showing the actual film footage of the convention floor when the convention presumably passed its condemnation of the Confederate battle flag. Of course, if you watch that video, you'll see that not only was the entire vote out of order and therefore null and void, because there was another motion on the table and you can't vote on one motion with another motion unresolved. It's just a basic matter of parliamentary procedure. That a very well-respected federal judge, and the funny thing is this was a judge who was appointed by Bill Clinton, by the Democrat. It wasn't even a conservative Republican judge, but a liberal Democrat judge, is a member of a Southern Baptist church and was a messenger to the convention that year, was trying to point out that the whole proceeding was being done out of order and, basically just trying to call a point of order. He was drug out of the convention hall rather unceremoniously and rather violently. And you'd see all that on the video there if you go to Southern Baptist for Southern Heritage at YouTube. Today's program probably ought to be another in that Southern Baptist for Southern Heritage series. But I'm going to deal with it here primarily because I need to get my January programming up and running. If you're a long-time listener here to the Dixie Heritage Show, you know that this is our third year, and that in the years 2018 and 2019, this was a full hour-long program. Most episodes we did a long-form interview with someone. But, of course, you also realize that there were a lot of weeks that we dealt with issues that were not necessarily Confederate, Southern heritage, and so forth related, but dealing with other topics, World War I, World War II, Russia, just any of a number of social issues and so forth. And what we have done is TBR Radio is launching a new show, and it's going to be called the Barnes Review Radio Hour. And in that hour, I'm going to deal with all of the non-Southern heritage related, non-Confederate, non-Southern things. And so this Dixie Heritage Show will be entirely related to things Southern and Confederate and so forth. And so I think that'll be something that you, our listeners here to the Dixie Heritage Show, will appreciate. Of course, you'll also notice that the new format is only half an hour as opposed to being an hour long. Long story short, I'm in the process of moving to Maryland right now. In fact, today is December 17th, 2019. And my office is just an absolute mess. And that's why I'm recording this as an audio and not recording it as a video. Because if you could see the state of my office and my studio right now, you would just be blown away. That's what happens when you're moving across the country, and that's what we're in the process of doing right now. And there's a good possibility that by the time you listen to this in January, that all my equipment is going to be in storage, or it's going to be in some, state of being packed or unpacked or moved. I might not have access to it during the month of January, and so I did not want our programming to have a gap in it. So here I am, it's December 17th, and I'm recording a program that you're probably listening to in January. And in need of comment, in need of content, I've decided that I'm going to just go ahead and deal with this issue in today's Dixie Heritage Show radio broadcast as opposed to doing another Southern Baptist for Southern Heritage video. After all, I do believe that most of our Southern listening audience is Christian in one form or another. You might not be Southern Baptist, maybe you're Presbyterian, maybe you're Greek or Russian Orthodox, maybe you're a Methodist, maybe you attend a non-denominational church, you might even potentially be Roman Catholic, though there are not nearly as many of those in the South as people would like to think. But I say that's not entirely true. Catholicism is growing tremendously in the South, but it's growing amongst the Hispanic population. It's not really growing amongst what I would call the indigenous Southern population. But be that as it may, most of our indigenous Southern population, which are the kind of folks that listen to a show like this one, the Dixie Heritage Show, you're a Christian person, and so this is of interest to you whether you are specifically Southern Baptist or not. Of course, if you are Southern Baptist, you know who Russell Moore is. If you do not know who Russell Moore is, I'll just tell you here real quickly. He is one of the vice presidents of the Southern Baptist Convention, and he is the chairman and president of the Religious Liberty and Ethics Commissions of the Southern Baptist Convention. In other words, Mr. Moore is a member of the swamp. We talk about the swamp in Washington. We talk about the deep state. And, you know, it doesn't matter who the president is. Donald Trump could be the president. George Bush could have been the president. Bill Clinton could be the president. Barack Obama could, well, he was squatting in the White House. He was never president. But that's a discussion for another day. But Jimmy Carter could have been the president. Richard Nixon could have been the president. John F. Kennedy could have been the president. Franklin Delano Roosevelt could have been the president. Ulysses S. Grant could have been the president. Abraham Lincoln could have been the president. Andrew Jackson could have been the president. And yes, I realize I'm going pretty far back there when I say Andy Jackson. But the point I'm trying to make here is that it doesn't matter who is occupying the Oval Office. The deep state was who has always run the country. And of course, the deep state has gotten more and more corrupt, and the swamp has gotten murkier and murkier with each succeeding year and generation. The Southern Baptist Convention has its own version of the deep state, and that swamp, if you will, of Southern Baptist land is run by committees, and it really doesn't matter who the president of the Southern Baptist Convention is. And I'll just say this, J.D. Greear, from what I can gather, seems to be the Southern Baptist version of Barack Obama. Granted, Greear is white and Obama was black. Apart from those differences, the best I can tell, J.D. Greear is the Southern Baptist equivalent of Barack Obama. You know, politically, they seem to be on the same page on a lot of things. But anyways, it doesn't matter who the president of the Southern Baptist Convention is. You could have somebody like J.D. Greear, who seems to be the poster child for a lot of what the Southern Baptist swamp has been pushing for the last couple of decades. Or, you know, you could have a president like the late Dr. Adrian Rogers or the late Dr. W.A. Criswell, who were great and godly men who, you know, were obviously contending for the truth of the faith once delivered to the saints, and who had no, goals whatsoever that would have lined up with the theological or political liberals of their day. But it didn't matter who the president was. In other words, W.A. Criswell, who was a fundamentalist, could be the president. Or Charles Stanley, who is at least a theological conservative, if not a fundamentalist, could be the president. Or a liberal like J.D. Greear could be the president. It really doesn't matter. The committees run the convention. And in each state, you have what's called an executive director. And it's the same at the state level. They run the state convention regardless of which pastor, you know, has the, shall we say, privilege of having been elected president for a couple of years. All the president does is go around and, you know, shake hands and preach in the larger churches and, you know, appear in you know, videos to raise money for missions projects and so forth. It's the committee chairman and the executive directors who really run the thing, and they are the swamp of Southern Baptistdom. And of course, one of the long-standing leaders now of the Southern Baptist swamp is a swamp rat named Russell Moore, who, like I said, is the president of the you know, Religious Liberty and Ethics Commissions of the Southern Baptist Convention. The guy has no ethics, and you know, his version of religious liberty is not the same as that of our Patriot Fathers, but I'll move on. There's a term for people like Russell Moore. They're called the George Soros evangelicals. You say, why are they called George Soros evangelicals? You know, George Soros is funding the deterioration of every other aspect of our society. Why wouldn't he be funding the deterioration of its religious institutions as well? And there are those who say that they follow the money, and they see George Soros's paw prints all over it. So anyways, you got guys like Russell Moore and the George Soros evangelicals controlling the Southern Baptist Convention, and they've just adopted one leftist politically correct agenda item after another. You know, all of their resolutions on immigration and diversity and condemning the Confederate flag and condemning the very founders of the convention because they were Confederates and so forth. The Southern Baptist Convention even wanting to take Southern out of its name, declaring war against all things Southern. You know, we're always hearing diversity, 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 diversity. There are probably enough black people in the Southern Baptist Convention to fill a phone booth, and yet all of the promotional materials coming out of the convention offices have more black people than white people in them now. You say, why is that? Because they're trying, again, to push this whole diversity thing on everybody. And there's been some blowback to it, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
Specifically, and it's making news, and the sad thing is it's been very embarrassing to people all over the Southern Baptist Convention. We've just had a lot of embarrassment to this. And that is what's happened at First Baptist Church of Naples. It's made national news. Basically, Marcus Hayes, who is an assistant pastor, I believe he's the pastor of students, which basically means he's a youth pastor who works with college kids instead of teenagers at one of the larger churches there in North Carolina. He is also a buddy-buddy with J.D. Greer there in North Carolina. He sent a resume to the First Baptist Church of Naples, Florida. The First Baptist Church of Naples, Florida have bylaws in place that say that a candidate has to have at least 85% of the vote in order to, get the vote, in order to become the pastor there. He only got 81% of the vote, so what does that mean? It means he didn't get elected. But the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention could not leave it at that. Now, before I go any farther, I want to say that this broadcast is not intended in any way, shape, or form to be a personal attack against Marcus Hayes, nor is it intended to be a personal attack against his wife, Mandy. In fact, I want to commend Brother Hayes. He appears to have done the right thing in this situation. Rather than letting this continue to just escalate and blow up a church, he's withdrawn his name and his resume from consideration. So he's done the right thing in this. And I want to commend him for that and say that this is not a personal attack against him or his family. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use the situation that has risen up around him and his candidacy at the First Baptist Church of Naples to point out exactly how far the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention is willing to go to push its quote-unquote diversity agenda and its political correctness agenda upon the churches within the convention. And this is of particular interest because the Southern Baptist Convention is supposed to work from the bottom up, and churches are supposed to be autonomous. So for the national leadership to be injecting itself into the politics of a local church to this level, it just goes against everything that Southern Baptists have claimed to have stood for over 150 years. and that Baptists have claimed to have stood for nearly 2,000. What happened at the First Baptist Church in Naples, Florida? Well, let's go back just a little bit. What ended up happening, first of all, is the pastor of 27 years had resigned. The pastor's name was Hayes Wicker, and he had been the pastor of First Baptist Church of Naples, Florida for 27 years. In January of 2019, he had announced to the church that he was going to retire. And the plan for his replacement that he had outlined to the church would have had the church bringing in a pastor who would have essentially served under his leadership for a time, and then Pastor Wicker would have completely stepped aside. You say, well, why did he suggest that overlap period? Why didn't he just retire? Because when you've pastored a church for 27 years, people become very accustomed to you. And it's virtually impossible for a new person to come in, no matter how dynamic, no matter how sensational they are. You're not pastoring the same church for 27 years, especially a church of that size, unless the people love you. And to transfer that love and that devotion and that, what's the word I'm looking for here, that loyalty and so forth to a new pastor is a difficult process. And usually when a pastor has when a church has a long-term pastor like that, the next guy is going to be very short-lived. Even the guy after that's going to be very short-lived. In fact, part of the reason I'm moving is to go and take the pastorate of a church who their last long-term pastor had been there for 22 years. Now, there have been 2 other people that have pastored the church since his retirement. And both of them, didn't even make it a year because they just couldn't fill his shoes. And it's been 4 years now. And I'm really hoping that I don't have to be compared to the pastor of 22 years. I just have to do better than the 2 guys who failed before me. And anyways, that was a situation that Pastor Wicker was trying to avoid for First Baptist Church of Naples. So he wanted to have a lengthy transition time so that the church could transfer its loyalty and its affection and so forth to the new pastor. However, the leadership of the First Baptist Church in Naples and the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention conspired together. And they basically went out of their way to badmouth Pastor Wicker and to force him out of his church and pulpit after having served it for 27 years so that they could fast track the Marcus Hayes candidacy. And Marcus Hayes, I'm going to let you know right now, is a black man. And even more than that, he is a black man married to a white woman. They have 3 mixed-race children, all 3 of which are daughters. And, you look at the pictures of them, and, they appear to be a happy family. And they appear, Mandy Hayes is not your typical, shall we say, disheveled, overweight white woman who appears to be with a black guy because she was just too fat and ugly to get with a white guy. Just the opposite. Mandy Hayes, I'm not going to say she's a beauty queen, but she's a very attractive lady, a very beautiful lady, and she, I'm sure, could have caught the eye of any man she wanted to. And their children appear to be 3 very beautiful children. Again, I'm just basing this on a photograph. But immediately now that Marcus Hayes has not been elected by the First Baptist Church in Naples, the cry of racism is going out from the leadership of the First Baptist Church of Naples, from the national leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention. And I guarantee at the upcoming national meeting in the Southern Baptist Convention in 2020, this whole fiasco with First Baptist Church of Naples and Marcus Hayes will be the springboard from which the swamp of the Southern Baptist Convention will launch its next political correctness agenda items. And that's why we're talking about this here. But that wasn't what happened at First Baptist Church in Naples. In other words, the membership of First Baptist Church in Naples were not a bunch of racists. Let me tell you what really happened. Marcus Hayes was seen on social media in a picture with Kamala Harris. Of course, we know Kamala Harris, the liberal 2020 Democrat candidate. And so questions began to be asked about candidate Hayes. Where does he stand on certain political issues? Where does he stand on gay, lesbian, bi, trans, all that stuff, LGBTQ, whatever that is? Where does he stand on abortion? Because Kamala Harris has a lot of liberal political positions that would not be in agreement with the positions held by most of the members of the First Baptist Church of Naples. And so they asked him these questions, and whether he was flat out refusing to answer them or the leadership of the church was refusing to allow him to answer them is uncertain. I do know that candidate Hayes blocked several members of the First Baptist Church of Naples from his social media accounts because they were trying to ask him these questions on social media, since there was no forum being put in place for them to ask him these questions at the church, which of course is very typical. When someone's candidating a church, of course there's a time for the congregation to be able to ask questions of them and receive answers. This was not happening. Also, Pastor Hayes appears to be of what's called the woke church movement, which is kind of a social justice warrior movement that's masking and masquerading itself under the guise of Christianity, primarily in a lot of black churches. And so he seems to be one of these woke clergy guys. And that aroused some suspicions among the very conservative membership of the First Baptist Church of Naples.
Extra, read all about it!
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it!
Of course, some tenets of the woke church just are not compatible with Baptist theology, and so they wanted to ask him some doctrinal questions, some theological questions, and they were not allowed to ask the questions or receive the answers. So what happened? 300 and some members of the First Baptist Church of Naples voted against Marcus Hayes. But here's where it gets really interesting. The vote was taken. Marcus Hayes lost. The response of the church was not, well, okay, our candidate lost, let's find another candidate. Rather, the leadership of the First Baptist Church of Naples began to kick out of the membership over 200 people because they had voted against Marcus Hayes. In talking to some of these people, and some of these people talking to media outlets, they were saying that their entire reason for voting against Marcus Hayes had to do with the fact that he had not or would not answer questions regarding his theology and his politics. It had nothing to do with the fact that he was black or that he was married to a white woman. In fact, many of these people were early supporters of him. They liked his preaching. They liked the fellowship they had with his family and so forth. But then when he wouldn't answer these questions, of course, they couldn't vote for him until these questions were answered. And so rather than giving the candidate the opportunity to answer these questions, the leadership of the church just accused anybody who voted against him of being a racist, said that being a racist is a sin, and therefore we're going to kick you out of the membership of our church because you're an unrepentant sinner. And so having taken over 200 people off the church rolls, they proceed to take another vote and, are threatening people that, if you vote against him, we're going to kick your kid out of the Christian school. If you're a teacher in our Christian school, or if you're on our staff in one of our ministries, you vote against him, we're going to fire you. If you vote against him, we're going to kick you out of the membership just like we kicked out all the other people and so forth. That just made even more people galvanize against him. And again, it had nothing to do with the candidate. They were galvanizing against the candidate because they were galvanizing against the leadership of their church, who was acting in such a heavy-handed manner. And again, like I said, Pastor Hayes, he did the right thing. He withdrew his name from the candidacy. He withdrew his resume. He withdrew himself from consideration, which was the right thing to do in this situation, and I want to commend him for that. But the First Baptist Church of Naples leadership became very heavy-handed, kicking people out of the membership, lying about people. And let me just say this, that the leader of the church's search committee is a convicted felon, and he had charges. His name's Neil Dorrell. He had charges of racketeering leveled against him in 2001, and he received 3,000 years. He received 3 years of probation and $10,000 in fines for basically handing out pay raises when he was the county manager. You say, well, how was that criminal? Well, because first of all, the county commissioners didn't approve those pay raises, and second, he was using them as bribes because of some political things that he was involved in. And so he was that's a felony. He was convicted of it. And there's another member of the church who's the executive pastor. His name is John Eddy. He's another one of the leaders of First Baptist Church in Naples, who's been leading the charge in these things. He had a felony charge against him in 2016 for carrying a loaded gun into the Miami airport. I don't know the details of that. Those charges were eventually dropped. But it just goes, I'm just saying all this to say that the leadership of the church is questionable to begin with. And, then you have people like J.D. Greear who are inserting themselves into this situation and, sending out letters to people all over the Southern Baptist world, basically saying that Southern Baptists are a bunch of racists. Let me tell you what's going to happen. The leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention is not going to let this rest. Another black man is going to be basically forced as a candidate upon a large, prominent, white Southern Baptist church, and that church is going to be forced to accept this man because they're not going to want to be labeled as racist. And one way or another, all of this is going to be used to continue advancing the politically correct swamp rat agenda of diversity and inclusion and, the condemning of the Southern Baptist leadership's past for, basically the Southern Baptist Convention just condemning anything that has to do with anything in its past to being racist and so forth. What are you saying here, Ed? I'm saying that in the Southern Baptist Convention, it's going to be a rough ride. I'm going to be brutally honest here. I'm having to rethink my personal relationship with the Southern Baptist Convention, and a lot of Southern Baptist people all over America are doing the same. And I'm getting emails from people who listen to my broadcast and who read my weekly newsletter saying that they're rethinking their relationship with the convention. Some churches have already left over this issue. Others are really just sort of bunkering in and, bracing themselves for the fight that they know is to come. I'm really not going to give you a conclusion here. I'm not going to tell you what to do if you're a Southern Baptist pastor or a Southern Baptist church member. I am going to tell you that the situation in Southern Baptist land is not what it seems, that there is a lot of corruption and backroom dealing and there's just, the swamp is very real in the Southern Baptist Convention. The swamp is not just a Washington, D.C. political reality. It is a Atlanta, Georgia political reality. It is a Nashville, Tennessee political reality. The swamp is raising itself up against the peoples of the very Southern Baptist churches. In fact, there was one national media outlet who their headline for this story was "Memo from Middle America: Woke Southern Baptist bureaucrats move to crush local church rebels. Rebels fight back." That's what we're seeing here in the Southern Baptist Convention now. Anyways, this is supposed to be an hour-long broadcast, or rather a half an hour-long broadcast. And I'm looking at my timer here, and by the time we stick the commercials in this is going to be about a half an hour broadcast. So I'm going to cut it here. All I can say is pray. Pray for pray for Marcus Hayes and his family. Obviously, they want to serve the Lord, and they want to do that somewhere. I can't say where the best place for him to do that is, but obviously, it was not the First Baptist Church in Naples, and so pray for them. Pray for that family. Pray that maybe their very place of service needs to be where he's at right now as a student pastor. Who knows? Maybe the Lord would have another place of service for him, but pray for him. And pray for the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention that would take a man who has never been the senior pastor of a church and would thrust him into the candidacy of one of the largest churches in America, and then, dare to condemn that church for having done nothing more than what they should have done, which is question the theology and the politics of a pastoral candidate. And then, daring to condemn them as racists when they were not, just because they refused to elect a guy who, someone in the convention leadership thought was supposed to be there so that they could take their pictures and have their next diversity campaign. Jesus asked the question. He said, when the Son of Man returned, he said, would he find faith on the earth? I don't know if he tarries his coming much longer, and if the Southern Baptist Convention is any gauge, he may or may not find faith, but he's definitely going to find a lot of dirty dealing and bad politics. Anyways, we are out of time, but do tune in next week for the Dixie Heritage Show. And hey, I'm just thanking the Lord that he has given us the blessing of being able to continue this radio show for a third year. And I want to thank you for staying with us and listening and tuning in. And until next week, God bless.